The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. Laughter in the dark. Not all nights were heavy. The jungle knew how to weight the world with wet and shadow. But Samuel had a gift for lightness, a knack for puncturing the solemnity before it hardened into stone. He could kiss a bruise off a moment. It had been 3 lean days since they'd seen a proper market, or even a hut with a spare yam. Their rations had thinned into an arithmetic that did not favor tomorrow. Kabila, their guide, had shrugged at this with a pragmatism that bordered on indifference. The forest provided for those who belonged to it, and the forest tolerated those who did not, until it didn't. That evening, a damp humor lay on everything. The wood smoldered more than it burned. The smoke refused roofs of air and rolled instead into their faces. Even the stars seemed reluctant to lift their veils. The stew pot surrendered nothing but a steam that smelled like boiled bark. A thin wedge of moon balanced on a thorn of cloud, and thought better of it. Samuel rose as though called to a stage that existed only because he stepped onto it. He pushed back the hood of his jacket, cleared his throat, ceremonial, and lifted a forefinger in oration. "Tonight, gentlemen," he announced, gesturing broadly to Uri'el and, with a flourish of respect that made no dent in the man's iron profile, to the unimpressed guide, "we dine like kings." Kabila glanced up, eyes narrowed beneath his scarred brow, then returned to honing his blade with a stone until it sang in brief, bright strokes. Uri'el tried to hide the smile that already pestered his mouth. Samuel bowed to the audience of trees. Where he got it, no one knew, but from the fire's rim he produced a charred monkey paw, pinched at the wrist like a gentleman holding a teacup. He lifted it high as if it were the scepter of a minor nation. "Behold," he declaimed, "the rare and princely Mano Simia, roasted to perfection and paired with a bouquet of smoke and regret." Uri'el failed to keep his composure. The laugh came fast and sharp, a noise not often heard from him, startling even the night birds into a brief silence. "That's not food," he said, and shook his head, which only encouraged the grin that had outpaced him. "It's protein," Samuel countered, eyes alight with a mischief that felt like oxygen. "And besides, if I eat it, I gain the strength of 1,000 jungle warriors. Isn't that how it works? You become what you devour." Uriel's smile became a reluctant vendor who'd already given the discount, and now watched in helpless amusement as the customer piled on more. "If you eat that," he said, "you'll gain the strength of 1,000 stomach aches and the wisdom of a hyena." Kabila's mouth twitched, no more than the size of a small coin, but for him that was generosity. Samuel examined the paw, turned it, considered the charred nails as if they might harbor prophecy, then sighed with theatrical gravity. "Fair enough," he ruled, and pitched it back into the fire. It landed with a hiss and a puff of bitter smoke that made them all cough like sinners in need of water. They ate what could be honestly called food, a mash of roots, and a strip of smoked something Kabila swore had been a fish at some point in history. Yet the air changed. Laughter did what machetes could not. It cut through the adhesive dark and let the night rearrange around them. The jungle did not grow kinder. Nothing so sentimental, but it paused its scrutiny, the way a stern teacher might look away while 2 boys pass a note, as if to say, "I too was young once." Uri'el remembered that moment later with a tenderness he rarely dared, the coals collapsing like red cities and rebuilding themselves, the smell of earth wet clear down to its bones, the way Samuel bowed to the ridiculous as if it were a king that deserved his full courtly honors. He realized then what he had only suspected. that Samuel's jokes were not a refusal of gravity, but a means to carry it, balancing the burden with a counterweight, making a yoke that could be worn across the shoulders of two. As the laughter thinned into smiles and the smiles into quiet, Uri'el felt the press of prophecy ease off his ribs. The great phrases did not go anywhere. Watch the rivers, watch the bloodlines, trust the shield. But they learned to live alongside soup and smoke and the kind of joke that let a man unclench his jaw. It struck him that Scripture, too, was full of feasts and failures, jesters and jars of wine, that not every holy thing arrived with thunder. Some came disguised as a monkey paw that no one ate. Later, when the fire borrowed its heat back, and the night drew them each to their blankets, a light breeze wandered through the trees, bearing the faint sweetness of something flowering far away, a perfume flung into the dark with no thought of who might catch it. Uri'el lay on his side and watched Samuel's back rise and fall under the blanket, steady as the river's breath. He thought of the 3 barrels, and their codes and seals. He thought of Tiro's hands and his grandfather's warnings. He thought of Evea threading Leora into absence like a seamstress sewing light into its reverse. Trust the shield, Zuriel's voice said again. But this time it sounded less like a command, and more like an acknowledgement, like a teacher naming a thing that had already happened. Trust is a decision, yes, but sometimes it is also a recognition, the sudden clarity of seeing where you were standing all along. Sleep earned him, not as victory but as treaty. In the treaty there was room for both the man who would one day stand at a threshold with a word to bar the darkness, and the man who had, this very night, made of a charred paw a scepter and turned doom into a chorus of coughs and laughter. Somewhere the river changed its key and went on. The jungle resumed its arithmetic. Above them the stars pricked their cold needles into the black and began, quiet as midwives, to stitch morning to the ragged hem of night. Fireside confession. But there were nights when the laughter burned down to embers. One evening, after rain had steamed off the canopy, they sat by the fire. Uri'el broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if all this is madness? The maps, the relics, the prophecies. What if it's just Zuriel's ghosts whispering in circles? Samuel studied him. For once, he didn't joke. Every man's haunted, Uri. Most just haunt themselves. Your grandfather's ghosts built vineyards, kept relics alive. You inherited his weight, not his madness. Uri'el shook his head. If I carry it wrong, I break everything. Then don't carry it alone, Samuel said simply. He drew a shield in the dirt around the fire's glow. You're the flame, Leora's the thread, and me, he tapped the shield. I'm the one who keeps you from burning everything down. Uri'el met his eyes. You'd give your life for this? Samuel's grin returned, softer now. For you, for the line, for the chance it isn't madness. Yes. Uriel's throat tightened, but Samuel clapped his shoulder before silence grew heavy. Now quit brooding. You laugh too little, and when you laugh, the stars pay attention. They'll need that. Uri'el let out a breath that almost became laughter. Almost. The shield revealed. Weeks passed before the jungle relented. For days they had trudged through green shadow without horizon, the world closing in on itself, roots like the bones of titans underfoot, vines like serpents lowering from the canopy, air so dense it pressed against the lungs like a damp hand. Then one morning, the labyrinth opened. They stepped into a clearing where stone faces loomed from the earth, their crowns bowed under centuries of moss. Each visage was half swallowed by vines, yet unmistakable in its lineage. The angular brows, the stern symmetry of mouth and nose, the eyes carved wide with sorrow and judgment. Even diminished by time, they bore the signature of the Anakim, the giants of old. Uri'el halted, as though the ground itself had spoken his name. A presence vibrated up through the soles of his feet, traveled into his marrow, and set his skull ringing like struck bronze. He reached forward with reverence, fingertips brushing the cold cheek of one stone monarch. In that instant, he felt the hum of recognition, not sound, not sight, but blood calling to blood. The root, he whispered. The word was not learned, but remembered, summoned from some depth beneath language, as if the stone itself had named its own ancestry through him. Samuel approached warily, squinting against shafts of sun that pierced the canopy and bathed the statues in alternating bands of gold and green. At the base of one figure, its crown cracked, its jaw crumbled into fern and dust. They saw an aperture sealed with a plate of iron mottled by rust. The plate had been hammered in place with a finality that suggested both reverence and fear. Together they knelt. Uriel's fingers curled under the rim while Samuel braced a boot against the stone lip. Their muscles strained. The forest echoed with the screech of corroded metal surrendering its last defense. With one final heave, the plate came free, and the smell of earth older than empire breathed out into their faces. Inside lay a bundle swaddled in oiled cloth, blackened at the edges but still sealed against time. Uriel's hands shook as he lifted it. He laid it across his knees, careful as if handling a newborn, and peeled back the layers. Fragments of vellum appeared, yellowed, brittle but intact. The ink clung stubbornly to the surface in strokes of an alphabet the world had forgotten. Uriel's breath caught in his chest. The script was older than Latin, older than Hebrew, yet it struck him like the sudden recognition of a lullaby heard in the womb. His body knew it even if his mind did not. He unrolled a piece with trembling care. The glyphs stared back at him, not as strangers, but as kin. Samuel leaned in, face close, eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Uriel's voice fell into a register not meant for campfires, but for sanctuaries. A fragment of the chronicle of the divided sons. The clearing seemed to lean closer. Leaves hushed, birds stilled. Even the gnats, swarming above their damp skin, held for a moment in suspension. Uriel traced the opening lines, his lips moving with reverence. The words told of two houses, Arab, the righteous, Arba, the corrupted, sons of one root, brothers turned enemies, a throne once whole, now shattered. Bloodlines torn into rivers destined to clash, again and again, until prophecy closed the wound or burned the world. Uriel's hand trembled, as though the vellum were fire. Zuriel knew, he breathed. He saw this. Samuel frowned, confusion furrowing his brow. But how? These were buried here long before he was born. Uriel closed his eyes. He felt Zuriel's shadow walking not behind him, but through him, the same way rivers run through valleys carved before memory. Because the blood remembers, he said. It does not need parchment or stone. He carried the echo, and now so do I. The jungle listened, truly listened. The hush was palpable, like a congregation waiting for benediction. Uriel rolled the fragment with painstaking care, returned it to its cloth, and slid it into his satchel, as if binding it again to the covenant of secrecy. His gaze lingered on the statues, half consumed, half defiant, their stone eyes fixed on something beyond the horizon. He thought of the generations who had buried this record, knowing that one day descendants' living echoes would unearth it. "This is only the first piece," he murmured. "The rest lies ahead." Samuel, who never lingered long in solemnity, clapped him on the shoulder. The sound rang loud in the still clearing, like a drumbeat reasserting life after liturgy. His grin returned, irreverent yet anchoring. "Then let's find it, architect. One step at a time." Uri'el nodded. His hand drifted to the map folded against his chest pocket. A map not of ink alone, but of inheritance, its lines burning hotter with each revelation. Around them, the jungle pressed close again, eager to reclaim what had momentarily been revealed. Yet eastward, the path stretched, through mountains, toward gates, toward trials that waited like closed doors, knowing they would be knocked upon. For the first time, as vines closed again behind them and the clearing surrendered to shadow, Uri'el did not feel alone. The shield walked beside him, flesh and laughter, scars and loyalty. And in the echo of his grandfather's voice, trust, the shield he found not command, but confirmation. The statues faded into jungle. The vellum whispered from within his satchel. The road pulled them on, and somewhere beyond sight, the divided suns stirred in their graves, listening.